Hello guys, my name is Francie and today is a very special day because we will recommend you an amazing book that we are sure that you will love. This book is called The Lord of the Flies. It was written by William Golding and it was published in 1954. But well, who was this guy William Golding? Well, Golding was a British novelist and poet who was born on September 1911 in Colum Minor in Cornwall, in a family which had several teachers. For instance, his father was a science teacher. And well, when Golding was 18 years old, he entered Brasenose College in Oxford and he started to study science, which met his parents' expectations because they wanted him to be a science man. However, 2 years later, he started to study English and he began his literary career. At first, he wrote poetry, but in 1952, he decided to write prose with his first novel, The Lord of the Flies, which is the book that we want to recommend you today. And well, it's surprising to see that this novel was rejected many times by several publishing houses until a publishing house called Faber and Faber decided to publish it. Today we know that The Lord of the Flies has become one of the most widely read books in contemporary literature. Actually, it has sold more than 5 million copies and it has been adapted into two films. It's a really famous book. It is also worth mentioning that this book was inspired by The Coral Island, which was written by Valentine. It was a popular English novel that is about the adventure of a group of young kids who got lost in an island, such as we can see in The Lord of the Flies. However, in this case, these kids managed to survive by applying the principles of the Victorian society. Well, we can see that the Golding's version is quite different, and it's because of the Golding's experiences. Actually, Golding participated in the Second World War. He participated in the Normandy landings in 1944, and his perspective was quite sinister. Actually, when the Lord of the Flies characters get lost, their human instincts come to the surface. And here we can see that cruelty dominates those characters, and several events make them have like destructive behaviors. And well, it's an amazing book, and it's quite different from this book that was written by Valentine. After that, in 1983, Golding was recognized for The Lord of the Flies and he received the Nobel Prize. And then in 1988, he was named as a Knight of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen Elizabeth II. And then we can see that in 1982 he was named Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Toledo, and during the ceremony he presented Spanish translation of his book Fire of the Entrails, which completed his trilogy, which started with a Rites of Passage. And it's a really good trilogy that received the Booker Prize in his country. We can see that all the Golding's books are essentially pessimistic. As I've mentioned, this man was traumatized by war experiences, and he was sure that the intrinsic nature of human beings is just evil and cruel. And this author was obsessed with the idea that violence governs our existence, violence and cruelty and brutality. We can find as well that Golding analyzed the human instincts of all his characters, and those characters had like a tragic destiny due to their nature, their brutal nature. And well, guys, don't worry about this pessimist sense that we can find in his books, because I can assure you that his books are really pleasant and they are really amusing, so you will enjoy them. And well, I also want to mention you several curious anecdotes in the Golding's biography. For instance, he believed that the Loch Ness monster actually existed, and he published several articles about it in the scientific magazine Popular Science. And it was really surprising because I believe that he was a science man, and it's kind of stunning, in my opinion. But well, another surprising episode about his life, which can be like disturbing, can be found in a biography created by John Kerry, which states that Golding confessed to his wife that he tried to rape a 16-year-old girl when he was 18 years old. Actually, this event had its fictional version in the autobiographical work called Men, Women, and Now. After overcoming cancer in 1982, Golding died because of a heart attack in 1993. While he was working on his last work called The Double Tongue, which was published after his death. It was published in 1996. And well, in a few words, Golding was an amazing writer. He was one of the most famous British writers that belong to the contemporary literature movement. He is an amazing writer that you will enjoy. He was really talented. And well, that's all regarding his biography.
Hello everyone, I hope you are well. My name is Juliet Charri, and now I'm going to give you an explanation about the context. So, well, as my partner said before, Lord of the Flies was written in 1954 by William Golding. For that reason, we can say that this book was written during the period called the Post-World War. But first, it is important to establish that the Second World War was a conflict that began in 1939 and ended in 1945 between the European countries and, of course, the United States. Well, the main causes of the war were the Treaty of Versailles, the Germany militarism, and the economic depression. The Treaty of Versailles was a document signed in 1919 between Germany and the Alliance country, in which Germany was blamed for the consequence of the war. For this reason, Germany had to give its territories to the victorious country, pay for the damage, demilitarize the army, well, among others. Germany militarism. Well, Hitler decided to reinforce the army and invade Poland. As a consequence, France and England declared the war. Related to the economic depression, Europe was in an economic depression due to the economic recession that began in 1929 in the United States. For this reason, Hitler was elected as the political leader in Germany because he promised to change the situation of the country. Well, another important aspect to understand the Second World War is that in 1949, Japan attacked the US naval base, and therefore the United States decided to go to the war. And finally, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1945, the government of the United States gave the order to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and 2 days later, they drove another atomic bomb on Nagasaki. This is why Japan surrenders and the Second World War ends. Post World War II, remember that this is the period after the war and the period in which Lord of the Flies was writing. As a result of the war, many people died. It is believed that approximately 50 million people died, including children, women, adults, soldiers, many people. Decline of the British Empire. It is another important aspect because in the 20th century, the British was one of the most important or powerful empire in Europe. However, after the Second World War, the British empires began to lose its colonies because it didn't have the economic power to support all of these colonies. Another aspect is rationing. After the war, there was a food shortage and food began to be distributed by the government. In the United Kingdom, rationing began in 1940 when bacon, butter, and sugar were rationed. And finally, Germany was divided into West Germany and East Germany. So the United States, Great Britain, and France controlled the West Germany, and the Soviet Union controlled the East Germany. Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States became the most powerful countries after the Second World War, and this aspect caused a rivalry between both countries. Cold War was not a military conflict. In fact, there were never any attacks. It was more related to the difference of ideologies because the Soviet Union represented communism and the United States represented capitalism. Also, this period is characterized by the invasion of weapons and technology because each country wanted to demonstrate its superiority. Finally, it is important to mention that the Golding experience in the Second World War and the period after the Second World War motivate him to write about the human cruelty in the book Lord of the Flies.
Well, guys, we can say that Lord of the Flies is not an average book. At the first glance, it seems to be a typical adventure story. For instance, here we can find an isolated island which is suddenly dominated by a group of reckless schoolboys, and it seems to be the perfect recipe for an adventure book like any other. However, it's not like any other story. Here we can find everything. Here we can find that human nature is not as expected. This book is really interesting since it makes us reflect about our nature as human. Actually, Lord of the Flies explores like the dark side of mankind, as well as the cruelty and brutality that underlie humans. And for us, this book seems to be like the parody of a children's adventure story. And for us, it represents the human's intrinsic evil nature. Because here we can find how several events made a group of young and innocent kids go from hope to disaster as they attempt to survive. And well, guys, I don't want to give you any spoiler about this story because I'm sure that you love it and you will read it. And everything I can say for now is that this story happens in the middle of a war. And well, suddenly a plane crashes, leaving a group of young kids um, stranded on a desert island. At the first sight, it seems to be a good scenario. It seems like the boys' dreams have come true because they wondered who wouldn't want to have a whole island to get fun and play during the whole day without being bothered by adults. And they believed that it was a real good situation, but well, they were wrong. After having fun for a few days, they noticed that without any adult, they needed a leader in order to make sure that everyone has fun and that no one behaves in an unkind way. For that reason, a kid called Ralph was selected as the leader because he had good leadership skills and he was really popular among the kids. But then a guy called Jack turns out to be the antagonist of this story as days passed because Jack wanted to have power. He wanted that power that Ralph had. And then the kids were worried about a creature, an imaginary creature that they called as the Beast. And I don't want to tell you any deep details about this, but finally, what was initially thought to be an escape from adults quickly develops into something sinister and disturbing. And that's everything that I can say for now. And well, this book is amazing. You gotta read it. It will make you think a lot about our nature. Are we naturally good or evil? How would be our behavior in an isolated island and without the influence of our civilizations? And well, many other different questions may emerge from this book.
Characters. Well, Ralph is one of the main characters in the story. He's introduced at the beginning of the novel by Golding, and throughout the story, different aspects related to his life are mentioned. For example, he's 12 years old, his father works in the Navy, and he likes to read books. Well, he was chosen by everyone as the chief of the group because he is one of the oldest and smartest kids on the island. Well, related to his cognitive qualities, he's one of the most objective because he always tries to maintain the peace and the tranquility in the group. Well, also, he defends the idea that the fire is the only thing that can save them. Well, finally, it is important to mention that he is in favor of rules and democracy. He uses the conch as a symbol of power. Piggy. Piggy is also one of the main characters in the book. He is fat, he is shorter than Ralph. He suffered from asthma, and also he wears glasses because he can see. Piggy is victim of bullying by all children due to his physical appearance. And well, he's the most rational character because he is aware of the situation they are experiencing. Piggy believes that it's important to follow the rules, and In relation to his cognitive qualities, he's an intelligent character because he always proposes intelligent ideas. For example, using the conch as a communication strategy or choosing a leader for the group. Yes. In the novel, he is a symbol of rationalism and the ideal human being in all societies. And well, finally, his death represents the evil that characterized the human nature. Jack is the antagonist of the novel. He wants to hound because he likes to see how the animals suffer. Jack is the most cruel character in the novel because he is the one who motivates the others to behave maliciously. Jack doesn't agree to follow the rules. For that reason, he divides the group in two. And well, in relation to his cognitive characteristics, I consider that he is an evil child. He likes to impose his idea, and also he loses control of his actions because he is willing to kill to have control of the island. So, for those reasons, in the book, he represents the evil of the human being in extreme situations. Simon. Simon is a minor character. He's the kindest boy in the group because he is always helping the others. In relation to his cognitive characteristics, he is the most conscious character in the novel because he understands what the meaning of the beast is. And well, his death represents the loss of innocence and morals.
Well, guys, I recommend you to read this book. It's an amazing book. It made me lose faith in humanity, but the story is really interesting and engaging. I wanted to know what was going to happen next with the characters. For me, this book was really special because this book was like an allegory of morality and society, and it made me reflect about the importance of having a set of rules in the society. Because this book made me think that civilization is necessary and the absence of rules may have horrible consequences. And well, I enjoyed this book a lot because the plot was engaging. It was really good. It was easy to read. It was easy to be understood, and it makes us want to know what's going to happen next, which is a nice feature that we can find in some books. For me, the beginning was a little bit confusing and kind of slow, but it becomes more appealing as long as you read more. Then you will be able to discover what's going on after a few pages, so it's okay. And this book is really deep, in my opinion, and I liked it because it uses several symbols on every aspect of the novel, from each character to the scenario and the character's actions and everything. And it makes the book be really deep and complex. And well, just to show you a little demonstration of how deep this book can be, I want to show you my favorite two quotes from this book. Those quotes are, maybe there is a beast, maybe it's only us. And then the second, we did everything adults would do. What went wrong? And well, the first quote that I've just showed you is really impressive because the kids of this story were afraid of a beast, as I mentioned before, However, it's worth considering the beast that is inside us. Probably what is outside our spirit is not as disturbing as what is inside us. Uh, we don't know. We don't know if we are like the victims, while the other creatures in the outside world are bad. And I think that probably we can victimize ourselves instead of analyzing our nature. And no, is everyone else bad whereas we are good? I don't think so. We used to think that we are perfect and everyone else is corrupted and is bad, but probably we consider us just as victims instead of being aware about our real nature. We don't know. And this book is really good because it makes us reflect a lot about that. And well, about the second quote, I really liked this one because the kids of this story were a small representation of what was happening in the adult world, which was a world that had the influence of a war. And well, those kids were behaving like adults. In my opinion, it was the problem at the first place. They became selfish, they became apathic, they were thinking of their own benefit instead of the common one, and they lost the sense of friendship. I mean, in a few words, they were just behaving like adults. And it was a problem at the first place, but well, it means that they were behaving like adults. That was a problematic situation that we.
In my case, I also have two quotes that caught my attention. The first one is this. The two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant work of hunting, tactics, fierce acceleration, skill. And there was the work of longing and faithful common sense. Well, this quote caught my attention because I consider that William Golding tried to present the dualism between the evil and the good through the main characters. Yeah, so on the one hand, there is the evil that led us to commit unimaginable actions, and on the other hand, there is the good that motivate us to act in the best way. Yes, so in fact, for me it is very difficult, or for me it is very complex, try to understand this relationship between the evil and good, because I consider that the social, political, and economic institutions have influence in the way we think. Yes, and I also consider that our belief about what is right or what is wrong are conditioned by social rules. The second quote is this. No, you have doctors for everything, even the inside of your mind. You don't really mean that we got to be frightening all the time of nothing? Life, said Piggy expansively, is scientific. That is what it is. In a year or two, when the war's over, they will be traveling to Mars and back. I know there is not beasts, no with clothes and all that. I mean, but I know there is not. This quote caught my attention for two reasons. The first reason is because despite the negative experience that Golding had in the Second World War, he encouraged people to live without fear, because he recognized that better days will come. Yes. And the second reason is that he recognized that human beings can change in order to not stay all their lives feeling fear. So yes, these are my two quotes.
Besides, I want to tell you that my favorite character was Piggy. He was a kid who suffers from bullying. He was a fat guy who wore glasses. He was not popular among children, but this character represents the rational side of society. This boy creates really good strategies and is the only character who cares about respecting rules. For that reason, this character is despised by the other kids, because he was like the representation of the contrast between the intelligence and intellectualism against brutality, like reason and violence and extreme violence. And for that reason, this guy was rejected by the other kids because the other kids represent the violent side of mankind, whereas he was the rational side of society. So for that reason, they were like enemies, and we can say, well, I don't want to tell you any more details about his story because I don't want to give you any spoilers about it. So, just that. The last thing that I want to tell you about it is that this character is really interesting. He is different from the other guys, and for that reason he was despised by the other characters. But well, he was my favorite character.
In my case, Ralph is the character in the novel that I like it the most because I consider that he always acts in a objective and democratic way, and also he makes decisions that benefit the whole group. And despite having the responsibility of being the head of the group, he never used his power to control or impose his ideas. Um, Also, I believe that Raul is one of the most courageous and respectable characters in the novel because he always tried to defend the rights and lives of all children who were on the island.
And the character that I liked the least was this guy called Jack, because he was way too evil for, in my opinion, and the character that I felt identified with was Simon, because he was like the kindest guy in the group, and I think that I am that kind of person. I try to be kind with everyone. I try to be a good person. So for that reason, that's the character that I think that shares some characteristics with me.
In this part, I agree with my partner because I consider that Jack is an individualistic person who is capable of doing anything in order to have power. And also, he's a bad chief because he doesn't think about the needs of his group. And well, he's a pessimistic character because he already assumed that they were going to stay on the island and no one was going to save them. And on the other hand, I also feel identified with Simon because he's a quiet child who tries to help everyone. He's a child who doesn't feel injured or invite towards other children. On the contrary, he's aware of the situation in which they are.
And well, I consider that this book can be enjoyed by everyone, but especially by all those people that enjoy books related to the human nature and our existence, when you think a lot about the reality in relation to human beings. It's an interesting topic when you are that kind.
This book is also interesting because the author makes a social critique of the current era. For example, he mentioned aspects related to nuclear weapons, the British Army, food rationing, and social rules. And well, in the same way, it is a book that allows the reader to question about religion, morals, politics, and of course, human nature. And well, on the other hand, I consider that Golding expresses his feelings and his personal experience in the work through the voices of the characters. So, my recommendation is that if you would like to know more about William Golding, I invite you to read Lord of the Flies.
Okay, guys, now it's the time for our literary analysis. And in that order of ideas, our thesis statement for this analysis is: The Lord of the Flies, written by William Golding, represents the dualism between good and evil that governs the human being's existence. And well, that means that along this analysis, we are going to explain that Jack, the character called Jack, supports the idea that every single being, every single person can commit cruel or evil acts or deeds, regardless their individual background or characteristics. And on the other hand, the character of Ralph represents the possibility of becoming good through life experiences. So our thesis statement represents that dualism between good and evil that governs our nature as humans. And well, we analyzed this book by means of the New Criticism, but well, what's that? Well, in order to explain that, I'm going to tell you that it's a formalist theory that appeared during the 20th century, okay, and it's focused on close reading, on deep reading. It's focused on analyzing the work itself, the book itself, rather than studying the influence of the author's life or the context or any external factor. It's just the work itself. And well, according to the New Criticism, the work itself is an unity, is an existence, and that's the unity that we must analyze. And well, the New Criticism analyzes the relationships between the text ideas and its form. And well, in that order of ideas, the New Criticism created two fallacies: the fallacy of intention and the affective fallacy. And well, here the New Criticism affirms that we shouldn't study a work based on the author's intention. That's the first fallacy. Secondly, we shouldn't study a book based on the reaction of the reader. The book itself is an unity that it's just independent from and detached from all those factors that I've just mentioned. Because the book itself is detached from any other external influence. I'm going to explain all the symbolism that we can find in this book. First of all, there is a conch shell. Here we can see that Ralph and Piggy discovered the conch shell on the beach, and they use it to summon all the boys together. And this conch shell becomes an image for civilization, for order, because it was an object that made children behave in a proper way, that made children follow the rules, and it governed this small society. It governed the boys' meetings, and it provided the right to speak. Secondly, we have the piggy's glasses. We know that Piggy is the most intelligent, rational boy between all the kids, and his glasses represent the power of science in society, actually. For instance, in the beginning of the story, the boys use the Piggy's glasses to focus the sunlight in order to start a fire. Which means that science, in this case, is a hope for mankind to survive, and that's the representation of the piggy's glasses. Then we have the fire. The signal fire is a connection with civilization, because it's like the last hope to be rescued and to come back to the civilization. Then we have the beast, that beast that didn't exist and that frightens all the boys during the story. And it refers to the primary instinct of savagery and brutality and extreme violence that we have as humans, as human beings. And the boy's behavior is what brings the beast into the existence, and that's why we can say that the beast existed, because of their behavior, that violent behavior. So the more savage and violent the boys were behaving, the more real the beast seems to be. Okay? Another image that we have is the Lord of the Flies. You will discover that the Lord of the Flies is a pig's head, and this image becomes the most important image in this story, in this novel, when Simon confronts the pig's head, and it seems to be speaking to him. This the Lord of the Flies tells him that evil lies within them, that the beast is within every single human. It's within our hearts, and the Lord of the Flies promised him to have fun with him. And when you read this book, you will understand what's this idea about. And well, another image is the image of the characters. Ralph, Piggy, Jack, Simon, and Roger are representations of something. They are representations of important parts of our human society. For instance, Ralph represents order, Ralph represents leadership, and Ralph represents intelligence as well, the rational part of society, as well as Piggy. Piggy represents intelligence, intellectualism, the capacity of thinking, of going beyond, of analyzing everything, of making good strategies. He's a representation of science. He's the representation of that part, of that rational part of our society. And on the other hand, Jack represents the brutal nature of our civilization. It represents the desire of power, brutality, violence, and well, then we have Simon, who represents like the natural goodness that humans may have, because he was like the exception among the kids. He was kind, he was pure, he was really good compared to the other kids. He is the representation as well of hope, because he had a message of hope, but brutality and cruelty destroyed that message. For instance, the boys who were civilized, the boys who were smart enough to keep the order in their groups. For instance, Ralph and Simon, they used their power to protect the younger boys, and they tried to reach the common good for everyone. However, those boys who were like the savage boys, they were really different from Ralph and from the other good boys, because they used that power for their own benefit. And well, now I'm going to describe some interesting elements regarding this kind of analysis, such as paradox, irony, and ambiguities. And well, first, we can say that the kid's attitude was a paradox in general. It means, the word paradox means to behave in an illogical way, and that was the thing that we could find in the kid's attitude. It means to be illogical, and it's really frequent in this book. In this case, the kid's attitude is paradoxical because at first they wanted to be saved, they wanted to be rescued at the beginning, but along the time it seems like some of them have decided to live in the island. And besides, there's a paradox in their fear about their beast, which we know that it didn't exist in the outside world, but it was within them. Instead of being afraid of some mythical beast, they were afraid about what was inside them. And their innate capacity of being brutal and cruel, that was the idea that made them feel that in that way. And well, Jack was an exception, because he wasn't afraid of his inner savagery. He wasn't afraid of that natural brutality. He actually embraced that, and he was proud of that. But he cynically realized that in that way he could keep the order among the kids, because if all those kids had the idea that the beast existed, he had that power among them, because he was like an image of protection. And well, we can see that the boys repressed their own capacity to reason, to think by themselves, to go beyond, and they believed in every single word that was said by Jack. they stopped being rational. They didn't know it, but it was happening. And in that way, it's a paradox as well, because the capacity of reasoning disappear, which led them to behave in an illogical way. For instance, if they were afraid about themselves, instead of reflecting about their nature or about their own deeds, they decided to create an creature that didn't exist. On the other hand, we have irony, which is to behave in a different way from what is said. In this case, we can find many examples of irony in this book. The first example that we can find in The Lord of the Flies in relation to irony is the fact that what are supposed to be young English gentlemen, well-educated kids apparently quickly turn into wild and violent kids, which is really different from what they pretended to be at the beginning. And besides, there's the irony that of the boys that they needed an adult, and the fact that when one adult showed up in the form of a dead man, he actually made things worse, because at first they believed that finding an adult would be really good for them, and that would save them. But when finding an adult just turned everything into chaos. And well, another great irony is that Simon is the one mistaken by the other boys for the beast, and he was then murdered as a result. This is ironic on many different levels. First, Simon is coming with the rational news, with the hope, with the salvation message. That what the boys believed to be the beast is just the body of a dead paracutist. And he had really good news, and this voice of rationality was destroyed by irrational impulses of the others. Secondly, Simon is the kindest boy among all the kids that are in the island, and he tried to, as I've just said, he tried to bring a message of salvation, and the irony of killing the person least likely to harm them, the kindest boy and the most likely to help them, reflects the irony of killing the hope. Because they say that, well, we want to be saved, but they behave in a different way from what was said at the beginning. And another irony is that the choir leader, Jack, the church boy, the guy who seemed to be the kindest guy at the beginning, the religious guy, they became the boy who destroyed any kind of moral structure in that island. And another irony is that it's not the civilized fire that Piggy and Ralph created, the one that could save them. It was the fire created by Jack that could save them. And on the other hand, then we have an irony that can be the discrepancy between the boys on the island, their attitude, their behavior, and the way in which they see themselves, which is really different from their actual nature. Their deeds, all their actions are really contradictory when taking them when comparing them to their to what they said at the beginning. And another example of irony that we can find in this book takes place at the end of the novel when the officer says that he expected the boys to put up a better show. And Ralph then tried to explain how everything happened, and the officer says the following thing: I know Yoli good show like the Coral Island. And it's really ironic if you remember the biography that I've explained previously, because the boy's experience was nothing like the story of the Coral Island. It was really different. In fact, the boy's experiences was the opposite of what took place in the Coral Island story. As I said before, the Coral Island story is about a group of kids who managed to survive, and well, they were lost in an island, but they tried to survive by means of following certain principles, of following rules. They could survive by means of being well organized. Which is way different from what happened in this book, in The Lord of the Flies. And well, another irony is the fact that the smartest boy, which is Piggy, wasn't called by his real name during the story, and he was mocked by everyone, even though he had amazing strategies to save them. And well, it's worth mentioning that his nickname was Piggy, and the kids hunted pigs, and it can be a demonstration of his fate that you will discover after reading this book. And well, the plot itself is also ironic in general, because both Ralph and Jack's attitudes are different in the beginning of the novel when comparing them to the way in which they turned out in the end of the story. It's ironic to see how the adult world seems to be an ideal world, even though it's as violent as the island, because we know that in that book adults were living a war. We can find that in the dead man that ended up in the island, and here we can find that this adult world that those kids admired actually was just as corrupted as their small society. And in this case, the author uses irony to show how such innocent boys became cruel. And well, to conclude, it's ironic that Ralph and Jack's image of what life of the island could be, because at the end it was really different from their previous ideas. At the beginning, Ralph said that it was their island, that it was a good island, it was a place in which they were free from any adult influence, and it was a place where they could have fun. But well, we know that it was nothing like that. It's ironic to see how these optimistic our kids were when comparing them to the end of the novel. Ambiguity that we can find in this book, one of the deepest ambiguities in The Lord of the Flies occurs early in the novel at the beginning, when there was a boy with the mulberry birthmark that suddenly disappeared. We don't know any clear answer about his fate, but this ambiguity reveals that his death is suggested in the form of the fire down in the mountain. In this case, ambiguity is related to the boy's death, and it informs the reader. We can consider that it informs the reader that the other boys' time on the island will not be that fun, because it was like a signal of all the violent and cruel events that will happen in the island. And well, besides, it's possible to see that Ralph was an ambiguous character, and he represented the conflict between being good and being evil. And in his case, he learned to be good through like life experiences. At the beginning, he was really selfish. He didn't care about the others, and he ended up really being really different from all those initial ideas. So for that reason, we can view him as a morally ambiguous boy, and he lost his innocence, but he learned to have faith and believe in the future, even though all the chances seem to be pointless. And throughout this novel, we have the chance to see how Ralph became good. So, in the beginning of the novel, Ralph had many conflicts. He believed that he was smarter than any other boy. He believed himself to be superior because he was the leader, and for that reason he tried to convince himself that he was better than Piggy or the others. But with after several experiences, he learned to be wiser. He learned to be a really good friend. He learned to think of the common benefit rather than the own benefit, and in that way he ends up being the representation of the conflict between being good and bad, but he is the opposite side of Jax, of the Jax side, and he represents the possibility of becoming good, even though our nature doesn't have that initial tendency to be good. And he's like the proof that we can be good.
Kenneth Burke created a theory called dramatism, and in this theory he proposed that human behavior can be understood as a symbol. Also, he proposed the idea that real life situations are a dramatic work, and we can analyze this work from 5 dimensions. These dimensions are act, agent, scenes, agency, and purpose. The first dimension is act. In this dimension refers to the situation where an event happens. In the case of the Lord of the Flies, we can say this. There was a plane crash and only the children survive and they are lost on a desert island. The second dimension is agent. The agent is the person who is involved in the situation. In Lord of the Flies, we can propose 4 main agents who are Piggy, Simon, Ralph, and Jack. The third dimension is scene, and this dimension refers to the place where the events occurred. In Lord of the Flies, the events take place on a desert island. The fourth dimension is agency, and it refers to the reason or instruments that cause the situation. In our book, we can say that there are 3 principal agencies, which are the desire for power, the absence of rule, individualism, and well, also there are others, but we consider that these are the most important. And finally, the purpose is the greater intention. And in this book, we consider that the purpose is to make a social criticism. For the new criticism, the literary work must be an imitation of reality and not just the author's emotions. So, for this reason, the meaning of literary work must be related to the context and the author's life. In the book, The Lord of the Flies, the meaning is related to the social, political, and economic context of the author, because the main reason that motivated William Golding to write this book was his experience as a member of the Navy during the Second World War. Also, the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were two events that surprised Golding because of the cruelty with which they were committed. So, as a consequence of this experience, he develops the idea that human beings are evil by nature. Similarly, in the book Lord of the Flies, Golding proposed the idea that in extreme situations, people reveal their human nature. Also, he presents the dualism between good and evil, which is conditioned by social rules. I say that because, for example, Jack doesn't follow the rules and he becomes in a cruel character. On the contrary, the best behaved characters are those who follow the rules. For example, Ralph and Piggy. For the new criticism, the intentional fallacy refers to the author's intention. And as I said before, in Lord of the Flies, Golding had the intention of makes a social criticism where the idea that human beings are evil by nature is evidence. Yes, and in addition, he decided that the characters should be children to defend the idea that human beings can be bad from a young age. On the contrary, the affective fallacy refers to the emotions that the reader can feel when he or she is reading the book.